Hello, my name's Tim Shoebridge and welcome to this video, which is my initial thoughts on this synthesizer, the Dreadbox Erebus version 3. Okay, so this is not going to be a review of the synthesizer. I'm going to leave reviews to people who are far more competent, capable, and have the expertise to do reviews. It's really going to be my initial thoughts. Now, I've only had this synthesizer for a couple of days now, and I thought I was going to have time to be able to really get to know it a lot. Unfortunately, circumstances were that I didn't have a lot of time to get to know it a lot. I've got to know it quite a bit though. So I'm going to do an initial thoughts video on this synthesizer, and I'm going to follow it up with further videos in the future. I haven't been able to really get into absolutely every aspect of the synthesizer because it is really quite deep. Now I'm really going to be coming at this video with sort of like three hats on. The first hat is I am a Dreadbox synthesizer owner. I've owned the Erebus version 2, the predecessor to this one. The version 2 and the version 1 were almost identical. There were just two very, very small little differences between them. I've had the version 2 for a very long time, ever since it was first launched. I love that synthesizer to bits, but I don't have it anymore. I chose some months ago to sell it to fund buying other gear. And the reason why I sold it was because I just wasn't using it enough. It was just sort of sitting there doing nothing. And one of the reasons it was sitting there doing nothing is because I have this Dreadbox synth, which is the Nix. And for me, this synth really sort of suits my style of music very, very well. And I just found that I just wasn't using the Erebus, I was using the Nix. They're very, very similar in many ways. I believe they have the same oscillators and very similar sounding filter. It's just that the Nix has some capabilities that the Erebus doesn't, and I end up using this far more. So that's why I sold the Erebus. I am going to do some comparisons between the Erebus version 3 and the Nix. I'll be sort of doing some comparisons of the filter and seeing how that sounds between these two different synthesizers. I'm not going to be sort of picking the whole thing to bits and listening to individual waveforms and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's appropriate, but I will sort of like come back to the Nix, and that's like one of the hats that I'm wearing when I'm going to be talking about the Erebus. The second hat that I'm going to be wearing is that I am a proud owner of a Behringer Model D. It might be a pain in the ass when it comes to tuning issues, but that doesn't mean to say that I don't think this synth is fantastic. It is fantastic. Now, the reason for sort of like having any comparison between these two synthesizers is that they are both 3 oscillator synthesizers, and 3 oscillator synthesizers are really quite rare out in the market. Almost all synthesizers, analog synthesizers these days, have 2 oscillators. These both have 3. And so I think it's really quite fair to do some comparisons between these two synths when it comes to those really wonderful 3 oscillator sounds that you can get. So I will be doing a comparison of the sounds between these two. Again, it's not going to be exhaustive. I'm not going to go and listen to all the waveforms and all the combinations of waveforms and all that sort of stuff, but I will be doing a little bit of a compare between these two at some point. And then the third hat that I'm really wearing is, trying to wear anyway, is, well, let's just sort of like talk about this synthesizer on its own merits, not compare it to anything else. What does it provide? How good does it sound? Is it worth the money? How does it fit in the market? Just general thoughts on it, basically, and that's really what I'm going to try and come out with in this video as well. Okay, so let's look at the front panel of the Erebus 3 in a little bit more detail. You'll see over here on the left hand side two oscillators. Very traditional to have these two oscillators. The same with the Erebus 2 and Erebus 1 and with the Nicks and probably with other Dreadbox gear. Oscillator 1 has a choice of two waveforms, square wave and sawtooth. And Oscillator 2 has a choice of triangle and sawtooth. Very traditional for these oscillators to have these choices. There is a way of mixing between them, and they both have individual glide controls. In terms of octave settings, there is a choice of three settings. These switches, when they're in the middle, are 8 feet octaves, 4 feet and 16, and they're both the same. Unlike on the Nicks and on the previous Erebus synths, the octave settings were staggered. So VCO1 could go from 32, 16, or 8, and VCO2 would go 16, 8, 4. In this synthesizer, they're both the same. The mix control is like a constant gain mix. So if I just set, okay, that's oscillator 1, that's oscillator 2, just tune it a little bit. It's a constant gain. So over here on the left, I'm listening to oscillator 1, oscillator 2. And the way it sort of blends them is that the volume really doesn't change. And that's a cool thing to have on a 2 oscillator synthesizer. However, in my belief, it's not a cool thing to have on a 3 oscillator synthesizer, and that's what we've got here. We've got oscillator 3 here over on the right hand side, and it's got its own little set of controls. It's in its own little box. So if we turn off these two, which has to be done, the only way to do it is not turn them down, but actually just take the wave forms off. And oscillator 3 has got its own level control. Now the reason why I had a little bit of a critical thing to say about this very clever constant gain mix control here is that basically there is no amplifier section where you have the ability to mix the 3 oscillators with independent controls. Oscillator 3 has got its own lovely little level control, and that's brilliant. These don't. So you always have either nothing, which is when these waveforms are turned off, or something at full volume mixed with oscillator 3 up to full volume. It's not very flexible, and if I were to set the waveform on oscillator 3 to be double saw, super saw is quite quiet compared to a regular saw. Now if I want that sound, but I want the other oscillators to be playing, it's pretty much drowned out by the volume over here of the other oscillators. Whether it's one or the other, or the middle. This is sort of like really kind of fighting to actually get heard. And I think that that's a shame. You know, they've taken this straight out of the Erebus 2, and it doesn't really work in a 3 oscillator configuration, not in my opinion. But anyway, it's great to have 3 oscillators, and this oscillator has got a bunch of different waveforms, not just the 3 that we have over here. You've got sawtooth, reverse sawtooth, square wave, triangle, sine wave, nice to see. This sort of super saw, double saw, and as well as noise. In terms of the range, it's a massive range. Let's put it on square wave. And you'll see by the light. Let's turn those ones off. Massive range, and so the idea with this third oscillator is that it's an oscillator, but it's also very useful as an LFO. Okay, so let's listen to the 3 oscillator sound. Okay, so we've covered the oscillators just to a very, very light degree. There's still some things about the oscillators that I haven't talked about, and I'll come back to those if I've got time in this video, or maybe I'll cover it in a follow-up video. But there's this feature here called triple ring, which really needs some discussion, and also there's an FM control here, which also needs some discussion. But I'll cover those at a later point. Okay, so let's move on to the filter. Obviously, extremely important component in a synthesizer. Now, the selling point really for the Dreadbox Erebus 1 and 2, and also for the next to some degree, is the filter. The two-pole filter sounds absolutely gorgeous. Something about it sounds really, really wonderful. And obviously, you know, I was keen to know, does this filter sound as good as the predecessor in the version 2? It's a different design, it's a different circuit, and you'll see that it will seamlessly pass from being a low pass filter all the way through to being a high pass filter. So it's a variable state filter, basically. And so they've had to change the design, they've had to change the circuitry to make this work and to make this nice and smooth and seamless. My initial thoughts on the filter were, I was a little bit disappointed. It didn't quite have that same bite and that same edge that the Erebus 2 filter has. But actually I've warmed to this filter, if you could excuse the pun. I think it's really quite musical, and it, you know, the variation through from low pass to high pass it's really nice. It's nice to transition through it. It's a shame that there's no way of automating this transition up and down here, but it does sound nice. I'm now going to show you and play to you some sort of samples of the Erebus filter, and then compare it to the filter that's on the necks, so that you know, see what you think. Okay, so let's move on. Next to the filter, we have two envelope generators. One that is dedicated to the filter and one that's dedicated to the amplifier. They are full ADSR envelopes as opposed to the limited type of envelopes that were present on the Erebus 2. So that's really nice to see. And also the filter envelope is loopable, and that's, I think, a bit of functionality that they've sort of borrowed from the NIX. The NIX has these sort of like modulators, which can be envelopes, can be LFOs, depending on how you configure them, and I really like them. The fact that you can loop this filter envelope is really quite nice. I'll just show you a little example of me doing that. Okay, so this video is starting to get quite long, so what I'm going to do is end it here. There's still a lot I want to cover with the synthesizer, and I'll do that in a follow-up video, a part 2 video. And the things that I want to still cover are the triple ring functionality, the FM capabilities, then there's the patch bay and all the patching capabilities. And as well as those three things, there's also a piece of functionality hidden inside this synthesizer which I'm very interested in, which is its auto-tune capabilities. So I'll cover those 4 things in a follow-up video and then give my final thoughts on what I really think of the synthesizer. So until then, thanks very much for watching.